Welcome to Gathering at the Table's Reflection from March. There was once a painter that was hired to paint a church. He figured since the church was so large that he'd save himself some money by, instead of buying additional paint, he'd thin the paint he had with paint thinner. And of course, when he finished painting, it didn't look very good, so the pastor comes out and looks at the work, and she shook her head and said, "Repaint and thin no more." I love a good pun, but this also points us to a good question about Matthew chapter 5. This chapter of Matthew is part of the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus ends the chapter by saying, "Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect." And if we take this literally, it's really hard to hold on to anything that he says, because we know that we're not perfect, especially when we look at ourselves in comparison to Jesus. Jesus says, "Don't murder," which, okay, that's pretty easy for us not to do, but then he also says don't stay angry with one another. Don't just love your friends, love your enemies. And don't repay violence with violence. But the last verse, perfect, doesn't translate from Greek as perfect. The word here is teleos, from the Greek word telos. It's kind of points to the goal or the focus as you move forward. This is where we get telescope from, because we're looking at something far away. It's something like working toward an end goal or a maturity of sorts. Either way you look at it, it points to growth. So it's not a state of perfection, it's moving toward God. It's being right with God, because no matter where we are, no matter what we're struggling with in our life, no matter what hardships we have, we're moving toward God. We're moving toward good. And knowing this, Jesus' wisdom here has a completely different meaning. It's not that we're going to live into each of these things that Jesus says perfectly, it's what we strive for. And life right now is far from perfect. People hurt one another, people let fear and greed drive them, but we could imagine just for a moment what life would look like if we followed the love that's behind Jesus' words. We're not perfect, but we always move toward it. We always look out for the best interests of those around us. Love God, love those around you, and that's everyone without exception. And this is part of who we know God to be. God has a desire for all of us to live abundantly, to flourish. And that means we constantly need to do better at loving others. It means that we stop worshiping fear and greed and hate and put God's love above our own insecurities and comfort. And that means putting other people above our own securities and comfort. It's a hard message to hear, but when we're seeing what happens when we choose other paths, the world's a mess. We see telltale signs of the lack of love. People draw lines on who is loved and who is not, and every single time someone does that, God breaks down these lines with Jesus. I have sinned and need God's mercy and love. God knows this and has acted. It's God's work that puts me in right relationship with God, not my own actions. And since God has done this for me, I have a responsibility to reflect that gift to the world. As imperfect as I am, it's what the faith God has given me requires. And I can't earn anything because I can't earn it. I don't deserve it. God does it out of who God is. But because when someone loves us and forgives us, we don't use those gifts to continue hurting them. We try our best to return it how they want to be loved. And God has told us through Jesus that the best way to love God is to love other human beings. So you are loved. You are valued. May God help you to show that to others. Remember, faith is not an individual thing. It's a communal thing. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.